¿Qué significa un año de amor?
We are here with Leonardo Bigazzi, curator at Fondazione in between art film and Lo Schermo dell'Arte in Florence. You're in the jury of the section Barney Light, so we are not going to speak about the films, at least not these films.
Thank you. Yeah. First time in Visions du Réel. I've previously had productions that were in competition here, but it's my first time physically, finally, coming to the festival.
We really would like to share with you today some general reflection about cinema, art, and actually share also what is very, very important for us. For example, this idea of continuity between art and cinema. I really would like to know from you, how do you conceive your profile, your task actually as a curator in art and cinema world?
Thank you for the question. I think curator means, in contemporary art, an art curator is mainly someone who makes exhibitions and works with artists to, produce their ideas. I intend this word very much as the etymology of the word, in terms of taking care of something, and usually that something is artists themselves. So one of the main focus, I would say, of what I do in my practice is very much to establish dialogues over several years and hopefully several projects with artists and filmmakers in order to accompany them and create the ecology and the economy in order for them to flourish and produce their works. Over the years, this has taken different forms. I have worked for museums, I have worked for festivals, I still work for Lo Schermo dell'Arte, for a festival in Florence. And recently, since 3 years, I work for Fondazione in Between Art Film, and the Fondazione is an institution that commissions, produces, conceives exhibitions and new works with artists that work in between the two fields, art and film.
It's interesting what you are saying about this ecological approach, I would say, about curation, because probably traditionally curation is more a question of selection. Of course, you still have to select, and that was probably a critical part of the work, and then to create and to propose a discourse. And I think it's very important, this ecological approach, but how can you manage or reconsider the task of creating a discourse or proposing a discourse within this ecological approach? It is, of course, very attentive and very sensitive to context and to exchanges and collaborations.
I wrote a text once that was called The Responsibility of Choice. I think as cultural practitioners, as curators, we make choices, and I feel very much the responsibilities of those choices. I'm in a jury here, so obviously this is a task that implies at some point taking a decision. So that's definitely part of my work, a part that I don't avoid. I conceived a project, for example, in Florence called Visio, European Program on Artist Moving Images. This is coming to the 12th edition now, so it's 12 years that it's been running, and I'm the only one who selects the artist. And it's a tricky position to have, because of course it's my taste, it's my decisions, it's what I believe is relevant today, and I'm very conscious that this is partial. I'm very conscious that other people have other opinions that are as valued as mine, if not more. But I think that there's a moment when we do this job that we have to decide that our time, our efforts go into one direction. And that to me is very much oriented with the artists and filmmakers that talk about the world today, about political issues, about ecological issues. I'm very much oriented towards those artists, for example, that start from their own biography and then through that are able to discuss and to make us see what are the issues of the world and what are the issues of different contexts from a different perspective, and hopefully raise questions that are relevant for building a different future.
Am I still rolling? Please, I want this on record. Go ahead then, but keep it brief, okay? For everyone's sake. Thank you.
For the moment we are speaking about art, film, you are sort of specialized on film in both art and cinema world. Filmexplorer is quite engaged also in not distinguish. I mean, we can continue to distinguish, but not to separate anyway these two worlds. We try to think in a continuous way art and cinema, but of course, a system of production, they remain quite different worlds. So, how is your way to navigate between these two, at least, system of productions?
I always define the film world and the art world as two lovers that sometimes have incredible nights together, and other times they just don't understand each other. And there's an incommunicability somehow. So what I find personally extremely fascinating, and I think I've learned by chance, or this just happened, nothing really happens by chance in my opinion professionally. There's always like a way in which the opportunity meets your talent or your instinct that brings you somewhere. And so what I find extremely fascinating is to try and bridge these two worlds by taking what I believe is extremely relevant on one side or on the other. So I think in this, even artists have become more and more aware of the possibilities of moving between these two contexts. I would call them markets, although it's a word that I don't really like, but sometimes it's useful as a, being able to reconfigure an idea in order to really meet the audience within the exhibition space, and then reconfigure it in a different format for a festival, for example, or for a cinema distribution, the capacity to encounter a much larger audience that cinema has, for example. So within these 15, 16 years that I've been doing my work, I think more and more I'm trying to, as I said, to bring some interesting aspects of the art world, because that's where I still feel that I belong, and bridge them with certain, methodologies and vision that I see in the film production system or in the film distribution system that I believe the art is lacking very much. And to make an example, just not to be so abstract, I think something that is very seducing and interesting in the art world is the freedom associated to funds, in the sense that you're not asked to produce in a certain country, to hire a sound designer from Spain because Spain is giving you money. So this kind of freedom and the possibility to really to not respond to certain canons that the film world is imposing to films, I think it's something that is very seductive for a lot of artist filmmakers that are working between boundaries and with experimental cinema. On the other hand, I think in terms of engaging with different audiences, the work that in cinema, for example, is made in order to, meet or expand the audience of, the products or the artworks that we are producing, I think it's very interesting. So in terms of talent development, for example, in terms of I've studied in the past and created projects that were looking at methodologies of the film world and trying to bring them and adapt them to our field. A good example is this program called Feature Expanded that we did for 4 years. It used to be a project financed by the media program. We were doing this with Lo Schermo dell'Arte in partnership with Home in Manchester. Then unfortunately Brexit came and that killed the European possibilities of funding with a leading institution from the UK. And this was a training program for artists, visual artists that wanted to do their first feature film. And by looking at and studying the methodologies of different labs like the FID Lab or the Berlinale Talent Campus or the one in Venice for the Venice Film Festival, I kind of bridge those structures and adapt them to the context of visual arts, which is very different, because a visual artist that in their career starts to think about a feature film, he or she are probably already quite established. So they have the capability of dealing with big teams and much larger, structures, but maybe they lack very basic information of, the markets or the festival distribution or how you work with a producer, a film producer rather than an art curator. So the program was very interesting because it was on the one hand extremely advanced in terms of creative development, but very basic on other things, what you would probably do in the film world for students. And this worked really well. I mean, it generated some films that are have been, distributed, like The Island of the Hungry Ghost by Gabriel Brady, for example, that one here in Visions du Réel and one in Tribeca, or others that I could mention. So
I mean, it's one of my favorite films.
There you go.
We have also published an article on Filmexplorer, but a project for which you were also producer. It was a project with Anna Vaz, the cinema film with Samuel Locarno, and then we discovered the installation in this wonderful exhibition in Venice, Penumbra, last year. In this case, you will say that you are also sort of promoter, you encourage also the hybridation of way of screening film, in the sense that you push an artist that conceive a work for an exhibition space to try a cinema version, or to push a classical cinema filmmaker to do an installation versus you look at yourself also a sort of promoter of this hybridation, or
it's two ways. I mean, I would say Anna is an artist that is so conscious about what she wants to do that she doesn't need anybody to push her anywhere, honestly. Like, she's one of the most intelligent and straightforward artists that I have worked in my career. I think the project Noche in America that you just mentioned is a very good example to discuss the consciousness that artists have today on how they can work in two different contexts. In which way? So the work was commissioned and produced for this exhibition that you mentioned that we did during the Venice Biennale, and it was conceived as a 3-channel installation, and that had a duration around 40 minutes. And then Anna decided to re-edit the material in a very different way. In the exhibition, she thought about chapters, so imagining an audience that could also enter as you do in an exhibition. The audience is much more fluid, and so encounter the work maybe for 10-15 minutes and still get a sense of it. While for the cinema version, that was around 64 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, but over 60 minutes, so 20 minutes more than the installation version. The editing was much different, was much more fluid and as a one stream consciousness of images and narrative. So I think that project is really a very good example of how artists are more and more conscious of how to navigate both the black box and the white cube. I definitely see or hope to see myself as a facilitator of this dialogue. In the past, I've definitely managed, for example, to bring artists that rarely had shown their film in film festivals into the circuit. I think a good example is Adrian Paci, that was here, since we are here in Visions du Réel, the film that we commissioned and produced with the Fondazione called Vedo Rosso, that was in competition 2 years ago. He had never participated in a festival like Visions du Réel, while in the art world he's extremely established. So all part of what I was mentioning before, the possibility to engage different audiences. And I think, in my experience, contemporary art can really expand and renew the audience of festivals or cinema in general, and the other way around as well. And I'm very fascinated by this dialogue.
Hello?
Oh, who's that?
We are a group of documentarists.
Oh.
Chả kịp hiểu ai và tự hiểu chính mình.
Filmexplorer is launching now a discourse about expanded cinema, because we have a collaboration now with European project Spectral, and we are collaborating with Labor Berlin. This is one of these few labs in Europe working with analog film. So we take this opportunity to reflect about this notion of expanded cinema that's very often probably still remains attached to very old definition that is related to the cinema theater as basis, and then all what is expanded cinema theater situation should be defined as expanded. So I really would like to know from your experience, because you are sort of expert now about this kind of hybridation, this kind of different experience in different spaces. How would you define today expanded cinema?
I think these terms like video art, for example, which is a term that I never use, because to me video art is very much linked to a history of the development of moving images in contemporary art in the 70s and 80s. Expanded cinema is a similar word in a certain sense. It defines, yes, everything that expands the one view of the screen in an, let's say, usual way, maybe with smells, with music, with live sounds, or with a different experience of the screen. I'm used to that as the normal. Like I had several experiences in the festival in Florence where artists asked us to add something in the cinema as to expand, if we want to use this word, the experience of the cinema room. A good example that comes to my mind was Philippe Parrenaud when we opened the festival a few years ago with one of his projects, and he asked the Dalang, which is a master of ceremony of the Balinese theater, to read a text at the beginning, and in the cinema room when people entered would find on each chair something that covers where you put your head, but it had a symbol. So like even the experience of entering the cinema was already almost like entering a temple. Like it felt already something, with just a small gesture, something different. And then the soundtrack of the film was played live on a piano. So I think the reason why I like to talk about moving images and why I referred before to an expanded experience, to many experiences that you can do in a film room, is something that will be more and more explored in the future. Maybe a good example can be music, right? We thought that the digital turn would completely kill records or vinyls, and now we're discovering that vinyls are selling more now than they did 15 or 20 years ago. So I think that will be the direction. I think there will be a fascination for film as a support. So the experience in the cinema of, what we would always do, and to reconnect to that experience and of the dark room where you sit, you go through the whole film and then you leave. And then the other extreme, everything that it's related to, for example, 3D or like all these more expanded experiences of the cinema. I think this is the future also, because otherwise what is left is only Netflix, right? Like the cinema room has to push on the idea, first of all, of the collective experience, which is something that we don't speak enough about this, which is not the case, for example, most of the time with an exhibition, because usually the encounter that you do with the work in an exhibition space is either by yourself or with very few people if it's not an opening. While the encounter with the cinema, for example, here in a festival, which is what I love, is like you feel the other human beings in the room, you feel the energies, the breaths, you feel if this film is something that is engaging with the audience or not. That's a feeling that I absolutely adore, and I compare it, of course, to a concert or to a theater play, for example. So I think the more artists think about these dynamics, the more they're also adapting their works in order to engage with the power structures and the way the audience lives these different spaces. I'm very fascinated about this, and I'm always challenging and discussing with artists about these topics.
My name is Carlos, and I'm a dreamer.
By many temptations am I distressed.
So the festival in a way have a new task. They are not just a place to gather a lot of films that are interesting and they are approached from a specific point of view. Probably now also this task to elaborate and to let the experience of the cinema theaters as something special. In a sense, we could also say that for before, the specialty that was before expanded cinema is now a sort of reduced cinema in the sense of the back to the cinema theater. So I have the impression that also the success of many festivals and also of Visions du Réel, it's probably this capacity, without being nostalgic, but a really new experience of the cinema theater, and at the same time of this collective experience. So how is your experience? Okay, you are in the jury now, so it's also a special perspective, but how is your experience, for example, right now in Visions du Réel with these films, with this specific audience?
Well, I can tell you what is my experience, starting from my experience of festivals in general. Like as I said, coming from a contemporary art background and coming from making exhibitions, the encounter, I remember the first time, it was 15 years ago that I went to Berlin, for example. It was just like so fascinating. It was like to enter a theater that has like 1,500 seats and see it full of people. And I was like, it really felt, I still feel that excitement also when I'm in a festival like this. When even 15 years ago, the context was different, because a festival would be a place where you would see films that you either see in the festival or you would never get the chance to see them again. This has changed, as we know. Most of the films that we have at festivals, you might encounter them on streaming platforms in a couple of months or in a couple of years. Definitely there's more accessibilities, even to films that are very radical or very, what a lot of people define the festival kind of film. So what is the festival giving you? Because otherwise, the future is that people will just access the film. What the festival gives you is the encounters, is the possibility to speak about the films right after them and to meet people that have different backgrounds, different perspectives. And I myself like to have these experiences because of this part. So I'm really excited to be part of the jury here precisely for that. Like when Emily invited me, I said yes immediately, because I like to expose myself to content that I would usually not review otherwise in my work. And I think curiosity is the first thing that we have to have. And sometimes, if I may say that, I see that lacking, for example, in the film world. Like I see, if someone is, a programmer that has to look at the Anglo-Saxon films speaking, then you mention like an incredible artist or filmmaker from Thailand and they have no idea who that is, which is fine, of course. But like, I think to be open, I'm not interested in categories. I'm not interested in divisions based on length or on content or like, what is a documentary today? Right? There's so much hybridation between fiction and documentary that sometimes is just like nonsense to discuss these kind of categories. Yet, I believe that in a festival like this, as much as I see, for example, in the Festival dei Popoli in Florence or, this historical documentary film festival, there is a true knowledge. And this is something I really like very much. The capacity to focus on a language and see how this language evolves. So in that sense, I think festivals that have this long history, archives, and could really be centers of knowledge in relation to a certain kind of language. But myself, I like to navigate between different worlds.
Common references. One of the reflections we already done on Filmexplorer many times is the fact that with digitalization, new generation are less and less common references. I mean, they have common references, but these common references are in a way spread out in different communities, not geographically based. In the sense, I have the impression that the festival can create this, just for a moment, just for a week, can create a common reference for everyone, and we can really speak about the same thing.
Well, first of all, a festival is a platform of encounter between these two sensibilities. For me, this is really important, because we tend as boomers or as previous generations to diminish this approach that newer generation have as being superficial. And there is that element for sure. But, it's in history, it has always been like this. The previous generation was judging the next one as more superficial, as more like loose or whatever. So we sometimes live on the nostalgia of the previous years, and in cinema, this is a classic, or even in art. So I think what a festival can do, I just come from a screening where all the rows in front of my seats were like teenagers. So like a moment of encounter between maybe a certain kind of layered sensibility and knowledge that, our generation or previous generation have, with this capacity of, scrolling down content as you do with an Instagram feed. I think it's interesting. For example, I like to teach because of this. I like to maintain a contact with younger generation to understand the way they see things, the way they think, because I also work a lot with artists that belong to that generation. There's a lot of people who tend to apply their canons to, a 25 years old artist, when that artist has a completely different set of references that are important for his or her work. So you either understand that you need to know both or to welcome both, and I really like this word, welcome different sensibilities, or you're going to be, judging with your own references something that doesn't have those references. And so it's going to be, a monologue or not a conversation.
There are some discourses that are very, very general and very, very generic. They're taking a lot of importance. I mean, at least in the cultural world, I would say that like feminism or queerness, decolonial and racial issues, climate crisis and extractivism, just to quote some major discourse today, they become new references. What will be the task of the curator in terms of proposing something, in terms of challenging the old and new commonplaces?
For me, what we do in terms of programming or curating exhibitions or supporting artists that discuss the present is always about, on the one hand, to not avoid like the major topics and major conversations that are happening today. It would be a mistake. It would be anachronistic to focus on something that today is not necessarily discussed. But, for example, first of all, to look at the past or at the future with the eyes that are now aware of certain tensions or certain new discourses that have been done in the present, or propose again bridges or encounters with past discourses. And there's a lot of institutions that do that, like linking, for example, feminism, first waves with certain discourses that are now re-emerging as relevant, or also to show that you're not breaking. It's like a continuity of critical discourse that has always, in a way, in different ways, been present. What I think it's really relevant today is the fact that these discourses are global. You're really discussing globally, of course, in a privileged context, but globally. And I think this is an incredible opportunity and a great possibility. I mean, there was a tendency, and the world divides into 95% who follow that tendency and a 5% that is proposing the next relevant discourse. So who I am, I try my best to cheer and support artists that I believe have a sensibility that not necessarily is, following the trend of the moment, but that are trajectories that I believe will last longer, and I believe that can, rediscuss visual language and visual culture in the long run. So that's what I try to do with my work.
And just to stress this visionary aspect of curating and proposing cultural themes and reflections, what is your next personal challenge?
To see my kids a bit more. No, I'm joking. To work a bit less. No, I think I've always worked definitely looking ahead, but also very much in the present, in the encounters and the things that are happening to me every day. And I have the privilege of having the opportunity to work currently on like 14 new films that will be released in the next 8 months. I'm so overwhelmed that I can hardly focus on something that is coming, but I'm working on the new exhibition in Venice for next year. So the Penumbra #2, which obviously will have a different title that I cannot unveil now. To go back to the very first question, I see myself as a facilitator, someone who creates conditions that can help artists to flourish. So within that's where I'm seeing myself operating right now, and then we will see.
Thank you very much, Leonardo, and enjoy Visions du Réel.
Thank you very much for this invitation.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Before you burn out, walk away.